Well, first of all, I believe in justice, but I don't believe that everything's going to be fair. And with fair, people are looking for equity. And fair means sometimes that somebody's got to give up something so that someone else can have something. We're living in a world where, unless we can, a nation of homeless people.
Welcome to Attitude of Altitude podcast, presented by Planet of One. We're sharing stories and conversations, encouraging and empowering listeners to be bold, take action, and be your best self, so we may be the change we desire to see in this world. Know that your attitude determines your altitude in life. Welcome to the podcast. Hello, guys. Let me go ahead and introduce Miss Starla Lewis, who's been a professor for 50 years and more, and has repurposed her life, is continuing to teach, yet she is also a human potential consultant with her own agency, very wealthy in knowledge, wealthy in love, wealthy in wisdom. And I say that, and you'll get to hear a lot about. So, Starla, welcome. I am so glad to have you with us today.
Well, thank you. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. And, I always like to begin by introducing myself so that people have a sense of who's talking to them and where they're coming from. So, my name is Starla Rosette Lewis. I was born December 20th, 1949, in a colored hospital in Springfield, Missouri. I was born to teenage parents, Rose Carolyn England Lewis and Alan Lee Lewis. I was born one day after Rose's 18th birthday, so I like to think of myself as a belated birthday gift. I'm the granddaughter of Rosa Irene Ford England and Guy Littleton England, Alice Lorraine Lewis Nichols Bagley, and an unknown white man. I am the great niece of Katie Elizabeth White Boyd, who was born in 1880 on a plantation in Missouri. She lived to be 100 years old. She was my best friend, and she was my first Black Studies professor because she was living history. I have three absolutely beautiful, brilliant daughters. Their names are Shetta Hay, Khalida, and Aisha. And together their names mean celebration of everlasting life and love, which is also the name of my Life Mastery Human Potential Consultancy firm. Two of my children have exalted me. So my grandson is Khalil, which means friend of God, and my granddaughter is Alahi Shai Yemaya. Alahi Shai means divine destiny, and Yemaya requires a lecture, but you can Google it. I have been teaching this is my golden year officially, but I believe that I've been a teacher all my life because when I was 4 years old, I discovered my purpose. Now, I didn't realize it when I was 4, but when I look back and I think about when did I decide I wanted to teach about love, I remember being 4 and thinking, I want to help people love themselves because people who love themselves don't hurt anybody else. And so I believe that's one of the roads to peace.
I love the introduction, because I cannot even imagine how many people don't even know their family history well enough to say it. So it's beautiful that you have all these details about your kids and about your family. Starla, what's it like growing up as a child in the United States as segregation was becoming to an end in a way, but it not completely truthfully? Would you take us through some of your history in growing up?
Oh, absolutely. I love my life. And I always say that we're all born into circumstances, but we're not our circumstances. And that, um, what we experience is part of our life lessons and our teaching. And so, for being born during legal segregation, in other words, it was by law. We couldn't go places, we couldn't live places, etc. There were a lot of barriers, but for me, I was taught that no one could stop me. Oh, so sorry. That no one could stop me from doing anything I want to do or being anything I want to be but myself. And so I never saw those barriers as things that could stop me. I just saw them as challenges that I'd have to overcome. And growing up during legal segregation, I can remember, for example, when we were allowed to go to the movies. And we only had one day, it was Mondays. And when we got there, we had to sit in the balcony. And when we got ready to get popcorn and stuff, we had a separate time to go. But when our time was to go, the movie had already started. So it was, little things that let you know you weren't going to be treated the same. I desegregated the school in Missouri after Brown versus the Board of Education, 1954. And when I was being prepared to go to school, my great, great, great Aunt Kate set me and my cousins down. And she said, "Child, when you go to school, there are going to be some white folks who hate you simply because of the color of your skin. And they're not going to want to see you do well. But you are not to hate them because hate only destroys the hater." And that's when she said, "No one can stop you from doing anything you want to do or being anything you want to be but you." And then she said, "Some of them will do it out of meanness, but most of them will do it out of ignorance because they don't know who you are." And so I didn't take the hostilities and the negative name calling and stuff. I never took that personal. I always felt like, well, you got some issues, you need to deal with those. But I kept it moving, so to speak. And so when I moved to California and I was 9, well, I wasn't 9 when I moved, but when I desegregated the school in Altadena, I was 9. And my mother said, "Well, when you go to school, there probably won't be very many colored kids." And I went to school and she was right. I was it. And I sat in my class, and the first day the teacher said, "We're going to talk about ancestors and where our ancestors come from." And so I didn't know where Negroes came from. I knew I was a Negro because that was the name that had been given, but I didn't know where Negroes came from. And I was sitting there thinking, where is Negro land? And my teacher came and she stood behind me. She put her hands on my shoulders and she announced to the class, "And as we all know, Starla's ancestors came from Africa." And I kind of went, and I thought, how do they all know it? And I don't know it. Well, one, we don't teach it K through 12. So in school, I hadn't learned it. My parents had been called Negroes or colored people. And so they didn't have a grasp of it. I went home. I said, "Mommy, did you know that we're from Africa?" And she goes, "What?" And I said, "Did you know that we're from Africa?" She said, "Well, yes, but it's been so long ago and we don't really know anything about Africa." I said, "Can I call Aunt Kate?" So I called Aunt Kate and I said, "Aunt Kate, did you know that we're from Africa?" And she said, "Oh, yeah, baby. My daddy came over on the boat." I was like, "What boat?" Because we don't teach that part of our history, K through 12, either. So it's challenging. But at the same time, I was taught that I was just as good as anybody else, that I was loved, that I was brilliant, that I was pretty, that I was all those things that children need to hear early before they go to school. Because when they get to school, that's when all the name calling and the competition and all that stuff that makes us feel less about ourselves starts to happen.
Starla, where do you think your Aunt Kate got this wisdom that she had? Because obviously, a long time ago, there wasn't an education system per se, which we already talked about. Education system is not providing everything that's needed. Where do you think
Mhm.
she got her wisdom from?
Well, I believe that wisdom comes from knowledge and experience. And I think knowledge is something that we can get whether we ever go to school or not. I don't even know if Aunt Kate could read. I literally don't know that. But I know her wisdom was from living life and what she called common sense. And then she would say, but common sense isn't that common anymore. And I think that one of the reasons common sense isn't that common is because we rely on education for our knowledge through the institutions, when education is about researching, learning, questioning, analyzing. So all my life, I was allowed to question, challenge, go find the answers. So even when I'm teaching, I tell my students, my goal for you is to become an independent learner, independent researcher, analytical thinker in awe of no one. Because often when we get in awe of people, we just believe whatever they say. And Aunt Kate didn't teach me, she said, question God. And I was like, what? Because I had heard in church, don't question God. She said, question God. Why? She said, because God has all the answers. She taught us how to meditate when we were very young, but she didn't call it that. She would say, child, it's time to still yourself. And that was to be still. And she would bring all my cousins in. We'd be out playing. We'd come in, we'd sit all around the living room, on the floor, on the furniture, and we couldn't talk. And in that, I learned how to go within. And I learned how to get in touch with the fact that there is knowledge and wisdom all around us. There is creativity all in us. And we tap into that when we go within.
Every time I listen to you, my mind goes to so many places because of the richness of your words and the wisdom that it has with it. How much of your teaching in all these years have you seen kids change in their thought process because they had the opportunity to really listen, to really understand who they are?
Well, I've taught a lot of different subjects, but in all of them, I teach love. And when I retired, I asked my students, what is it that I teach? And they said, you teach us how to see ourselves, you teach us how to love ourselves, and you teach us how to use love to address the issues in our lives. And I realized, because this was after over, I'm going to say 40 years of teaching when that conversation took place, I realized that one, the child that was in me that wanted to teach people how to love themselves has been doing that all her life. And then two, it helped me understand that when people learn to love themselves, that gift, and I really like to say re-love themselves, because I believe we come here loving ourselves, and then we get judged and analyzed and criticized and all those others eyes, and so then we start to self-doubt. And so what I like to believe is I have the opportunity to help people go back to the essence of who they are, which is love. I believe we are love, you see. And so the proof for me, as AK would say, the proof is in the pudding. So the proof for me is everywhere I go, I run into students that I've had, throughout my career, and they remember me. But more importantly, they remember things that they learned in class. For example, I was talking to my daughter on the phone. She was in Las Vegas. She lives there. And she was at a party with some people who had come from San Diego. And she said, Mom, one of your students is here and he wants to say hi to you. And so I said, okay. So he got on the phone and he said, Miss Lewis, blah, 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 blah. And he goes, I want to tell you that exercise that you did in the class, where you had all the men stand up and you said, repeat after me. And you said, the woman that I have sex with could be the mother of my child and could be in my life forever. He said, that literally changed the trajectory of my life. And I am so grateful. So little things that were done in class, said by me, are often said by other students, stay with students. And literally, my daughter says, we can't go anywhere with you without somebody stopping you to talk to you. Two stories. One is, I had a waitress say, "Don't you teach at Mesa College?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "Well, I never took your class, but my roommate took your class." And we would wait up for her after class to discuss what was talked about in class. I mean, who does that, right? So that lets me know that our students want to learn, they want to know, and they don't just want facts and figures. They want deeper understanding and meaning. And then my other example is my daughter became really good friends with one of my students, and she moved back to South Africa. And so she asked my daughter to sing for her at her wedding. And so we went to South Africa, and my daughter goes, "Finally, someplace where nobody's going to come up to you." So we're at the reception, and this woman says, "Excuse me, but didn't you used to teach at City College?" And my daughter goes, "I'm through, I'm done, I'm over it." So people remember you when they know you care, and they remember you when you give them something for themselves. It's not just about you. I hear so many people, "I this and I that and I this and I that." Okay, but what did they get? You know,
What are some of the exercises that you used to teach your students that had a profound impact? Because I've heard you
on
talk
them.
about a few of them. Yes. And even you, how you came up with them.
Well, it's interesting because often I'll start with the one I just shared with the young men standing up. I was teaching a class at City College, and it was sexuality and Black culture. And this young man was talking about his baby's mother. And he said, "My baby got a crazy mama." And he started talking about her. And then this other young man says, "You think your baby got a crazy mama? Let me tell you about my baby's crazy mama." And then he started. And then another one started. And then at the end of their going around the room, this one young man said, "Miss Lewis, what do you do when your baby got a crazy mama?" And I said, "You ask yourself, why did you pick her?" And they're like, "What? No, I didn't pick her." I said, "Where you plant, you picked." And then they have to start taking responsibility for their life and their choices. And we don't teach that. I don't know why we don't teach it, but we don't teach everyone. You are responsible for every choice that you make. We don't own our choices. They made me. It was my bad friends, my bad group. You chose those friends. You chose that group. Nobody forced you. And so it's important that we start to understand that. Another exercise that I did this with inmates. I was speaking to 500 incarcerated youth. And I said to them, "You're here because you don't know who you are." And then they started booing. And if you've never been booed by 500 people, it's resounding. And they booed for a good while. I'm going to say at least 2-3 minutes. And then, and the guards started getting nervous. And I said, "Oh, you think not?" I said, "Then when you were born, someone was supposed to tell you that you are brilliant, that everybody is born into this world with a brilliant light to shine. You know, you've used your brilliance in the negative. You used it surveying houses. You used it knowing when to get in and get the stuff. You used it, selling illegal substance. You've used it brilliantly, but look where it got you. But anything done in the negative can be done in the positive. And so if you choose to use your brilliance in the positive, you can get out and stay out. I told them when you were born, somebody was supposed to tell you that you're powerful and that your power is in your ability to make choices. That's your power. And it's also called your freedom. And so you're free to choose. And so you have to understand that with those choices will come consequences. And once again, you're responsible for the consequences of your choices. And then I told them when you popped out of your mother's womb, somebody was supposed to tell you that you are limitless, multi-talented, multifaceted, with many gifts and talents. And you need to identify your gifts and talents and identify which ones bring you joy, and then create a life around your gifts and talents, because we're all here to serve one another. And then I told them, and this was the most important one for me, when you popped out of your mother's womb, somebody was supposed to tell you that you are love. Not loved, but you're the thing itself. And if you be who you are, then what you do is you become a love magnet and you start attracting it and you'll never be without it, you know? And so they listened. These young men stood up with such pride. But the thing I know, how did I know they listened? Because months and months later, I was substitute teaching at a school, and this young Latino man stepped out of the shadows and he said, don't I know you? And it was late at night. He had on khakis and a hairnet and the gang look. And I said, I don't know, do you? And he goes, weren't you at Claremont Juvenile Facility? And I said, yes. He goes, I was there. He said, I'm in the positive. And he was now enrolled in school and he had a job and he was sharing all this good stuff with me. The next day, still subbing at the same school, I saw this young African American man with cornrow braids. He was running through the cafeteria, he yells, sister, sister. And I looked up, he goes, I'm in the positive. And I went, you know, and then I'm in the bank and I hear this woman talking to her daughter, and her daughter said, that's her mom, that's her. And the mother walked up to me and she said, I don't know what you said to my daughter, but she was in Claremont Juvenile Facility and she has really changed her life. And one of the messages that I try to give my students is, if you don't like your life, you can change it. You can change it. If you don't like the way you're interacting with your parents, you can change that, by changing the way you interact with them. So, I think that's just been many examples. And then the last one I want to share, because I was teaching this class called Seek Out Success, and it was at a high school. And I don't have a credential to teach in high school, but I was requested to teach in high school. And so I came to teach this class, and I realized it was the class of students that had been kicked out of all their other classes. And and none of the other teachers were going to let them back in. Their behavior was very, very different. But the first thing I realized when I walked into the classes, there was a gangbanger who was in charge of that class. And so I said to him, I need your help. And he goes, what? I said, I need you to help me keep this class in order. He said, I got you. I said, okay, if you see anyone doing anything out of order, I just want you to say to them, respect yourself. I said, that's all I want you to say. He says, I can do that. And then there was this other young man who was like the class clown. He was all over the place. And everybody was laughing at everything he did. And I asked him if he knew how to rap. And of course, he said he did. And I said, well, I need you to summarize what we do in class in a rap at the end of every class. Could you do that for me? So now he's busy. Now he has to listen. Now he has to pay attention. But he's going to have his attention that he's seeking. So that turned out to be an amazing class. And then I had a young man, he was European American, he's a young white male. And he came up to me one day during lunch and he goes, how come you're not afraid of me? Because he was into devil worship and he had his altar on his desk. And so I simply said to him, oh, that's because I deal with a higher power. And he goes, well, how do you get rid of demons? And so then I said, well, no one's ever asked me this, but I thought about it. And I said, well, why did you invite them in? And then he gave me this whole story about his stepmother and how wicked she was and how he was trying to protect himself and blah, blah, blah. This young man, who was just failing in so many ways, ended up graduating that year. He pulled it together. He did that. I didn't do that. I wasn't even teaching him by the second semester. So I'm just saying that when we give people tools that they already want, not like you're stuffing them down their throat. They want tools. They want information. How do I navigate, through this life in this world? They need that, so. And then finally, one day in that same class, an exercise that I did was I brought all my children's books, and they were very multicultural. And I brought them to class. And in fact, one of my students saw me and he helped me carry them because I had so many. And we moved all the chairs. We sat on the floor. I said, we're going back to kindergarten. And so I started reading one of the books, and then we started talking about the characters and the plot and all that stuff. And then somebody said, Miss Lewis, could I read one? And so then I started passing the books around. Well, we did this. And one of the things that happened was they said, will you bring them again tomorrow? So I'm confused because I'm trying to figure, okay, what just happened? And then I asked them, how many of you were read books when you were children with images that look like you? And none of them. It had the golden books and the what was his name? The rhymer guy. I'm blocking on his
Seuss, Dr.
Dr.
Seuss.
Seuss books, those books, and it had that, but they hadn't had books with stories and messages that they could relate to in multiple languages, et cetera, et cetera. So that was a lesson for me that when in school, there's a whole group of kids who they've been trying to teach how to read, but they never let them read about themselves. So they're not as engaged, as excited as independently reading, etc. So those are just some of the examples of and then I also do this thing. I love this. It's called the color line. And I have all my students line up a lot based on their the shades of their skin. And it goes from dark to light. And then we walk in and we make a circle. And what happens in that exercise is that first they see the blending of the different ethnicities, because you can't just say these are the black kids and these are the brown kids and these are the yellow kids and you can't do that, because all those shades are in all those groups. So they start to see that overlapping connection. And then they start talking about what were their experiences living in this society. And so many stories. And then when I get to the white kids, I have them line up according to hair color, from dark hair to blonde hair. And then they start talking about, that's their colorism, is their hair thing, and how the blonde sister was treated better and how her father told her she was pretty, but the brunette sister was told that she was smart and stuff like that. So it's an experience that, once again, it's a connector. Even though it sounds like it's going to be different, it isn't. My goal for all my students, and I tell them at the beginning, is for them to be able to see themselves into every human being that they meet.
I so agree with you on that. I've been teaching classes with young generation, 18 to about 28, maybe 16 sometimes. And I think that's the biggest part about the teaching part, is for them to see themselves within someone else, that they're all the same and we're all connected, that there's nothing so separate in our beingness except in the way that we come across to each other. And I had one student who I talk about taking 100 responsibility and being in charge of your life. And she was almost taken back by that. It's like, what about the negative stuff? I said, especially the negative stuff. That's your opportunity to really delve into who you would like to be and how you're going to change everything, because you can do that. So I
Mhm.
love hearing your stories and the impacts that they have. How did you get to become so loving? Because I know you've gone through some experience yourself with a car accident that really did some damage in your head. Would you go through that process and allow people to understand how you became so enthralled and understand that love is one of the answers to this world?
Well, I know I'm very fortunate in that my foundation is love. My parents were loving people. They weren't violent people. My mother didn't believe in spanking. So I never had a lot of, when I say abuse, most parents are not trying to ever abuse their kids. Not most. But they don't have parenting tools. My mother wanted she said she was a spanked child, so she decided she wasn't going to spank me because she said all of her spankings were from trying to express herself, and she grew up in that children should be seen and not heard era. And so she wanted to give me a voice. So I've always had a voice in my home. I always was allowed to be different. And part of that is growing up in segregation. If you don't learn how to be different, then you're always putting yourself down and trying to be like somebody else. So in order to own my own uniqueness, I was given the right to be different. In fact, my family, even to this day, will say, well, Starla's always been a little different. What? But I don't drink. What? Because in my growing up, I understood it was a choice. You didn't have to do it. And I didn't like the way people acted when they did it. So I was like, I can pass on that. So a lot of the choices that I made growing up was from Aunt Kate's wisdom. Observe other people and know you don't have to make all the mistakes yourself. You can learn from other people's mistakes. When I was a teenager, one of my cousins died from a self-induced abortion. So that gave me parameters to say, well, I don't want to put myself in that situation. So I'm going to choose not to have sex. I don't tell people that's the number one choice for anyone. I'm saying that was my choice because I didn't want to have to deal with the possibility of pregnancy. I had another cousin, 15, got pregnant, got married, and had a nervous breakdown when she was 19. I understood this, having these babies isn't that easy of a thing. So I was like, I want a support system. So in other words, we make choices. But then I got a divorce and there went my support system. And so I realized, okay, you can't control everything that happens in your life, but you can always control how you respond to it. And so that's why I really try to get people to understand it's important to take responsibility for your actions. I can't be responsible that you won't let me buy a house in this neighborhood, but that doesn't mean I can't buy a wonderful house.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about expanding our perspectives and expanding our consciousness. And I know that there was nothing or no one that could tell me that I didn't come from a loving family. And by that, I don't just mean my mom and my dad, because sometimes I would go live with my grandmother, and that was home too. And my grandmothers lived across the street from each other, so I was running back and forth. I just always felt surrounded by love. And then Aunt Kate was a church lady, so I would spend a lot of time with the church people who were also very loving and supportive. And what I try to teach my students is this. If you don't have love in your life, it's because you're not choosing to give love, because it's like a magnet. I said, and if your parents can't love you or don't know how to love you the way you want to be loved, then add another mom, add another dad, add a big mama, add a play sister. You can get your needs met if you're not looking that it has to come from a specific person or a specific place. Expand, your consciousness and expand your openness to love.
Would you actually delve into a little bit about your car accident specifically and how you had to relearn to love yourself and find yourself? Because I know a lot of young individuals, I'm just going to say young, that are figuring out their way in the world. And that's one of the things that they think it's going to come from somewhere else.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So when I got in my car accident, I got hit by two cars and I had a brain injury. I looked fine, but my brain it was scrambled and it wasn't functioning the way it had always functioned. And so for me, it wasn't so much the brain injury as much as the way I felt and thought, because we are our thoughts. Belief is behavior. And so I realized that nothing about myself felt familiar. It was like I was in somebody else's body or out of my body. something was amiss. And as I was starting to deal with it, I was watching all these documentaries around athletes who had had a series of concussions, and some of them had taken their lives. And I was trying to get a hold of my own life. And this one young man said, I feel like I'm living in a dream. And something clicked with that statement for me. And I said, I feel like I'm a ghost of my previous self. And then I started thinking, how do I get back to my previous self? And then I decided at some point, I didn't have to get back to my previous self. I had to learn from this experience so that I could embrace my new self, which would be part of my previous self, but then another part that was new. And what it did for me was it allowed me to really start seeing the beauty and value in my accident, because I'm teaching people how to love themselves, but I really am not understanding why they don't. Like, why don't you love yourself? How hard can it be? And the reality is, people don't love themselves because they can't see themselves. We don't ask children, who you be or who are you? We ask them, what do you want to be? As if they're not already something. So they don't even get to spend a lot of time when we're young thinking about, who am I? Or who do I be? Who is this person? And we don't get to see the fact that when we were little, we smiled at ourselves in the mirror. We didn't criticize it. We just smile. Sometimes we crawl up and kiss it. We accept it. We looked at our parents and we didn't say, ooh, I wish my parents were cuter. Because if they were cuter, then I'd be cuter. You know what I mean? We didn't do that kind of stuff. But we learned that living in the world, and we learned that living in society. And I think the longer we make people believe that they have to become something, then they won't recognize that they already are something. And they'll miss this amazing opportunity to see their gifts and their talents. My mother used to say, you are so cute. And I'd say, thank you. And she'd say, so what? And what she was trying to teach me is that you're so much more than that. You're more than just a cute face. Well, in our society right now, we're so obsessed with how people look that we don't get to develop how people are. How are you? And we don't understand the connection between how you are and how you look. Because literally it changed. That's transformational. It's like you see somebody and go, and then you get to know them and you go, you know. And so we have to see we're whole beings, not parts. We spend a lot of time with our body parts, enhancing our parts. But what about our whole? And the essence of ourself shines from within. It's inside out, not outside in. So, yeah, and that's my mother. All that's my mother. My mother was an amazing, beautiful woman who didn't believe in vanity. But she said, if you don't think you're cute, why should anybody else? So it starts with you.
Could you take us through the exercise that you do sometimes with people as if they're 5 years old?
Oh, it's a talent show. So when we do talent shows in my class, we do it especially in the Black family class, but we do it in a lot of our classes. And the talent show is you share what your talent is. And then but when you're sharing it, you have to share it as if you're 5. And so what that does is that frees your spirit, because we were freer when we were 5. And so I've had somebody come in and play the ukulele, or somebody was standing on the desk as if it was the surfboard and showing us how to surf. Or someone would take the whole class out to the track field and show them how to jump hurdles. But whatever it was, we were experiencing it and enjoying it, and sometimes learning from it, teaching people who don't like to dance how to dance, and just showing them that it's just moving, and it's not about, it has to look just like this. And so people got freer and freer. I mean, that's basically it. How to draw. And so you draw as if you're five, you know. I mean, they love that. The students really love that exercise.
I think that one is stood out in my mind as you said it before, because the world teaches people that they got to adhere to a certain something, and they put you into these little boxes,
Mhm.
which is so beautiful to see. Your teachings and your consulting is about there is no box. There
Exactly.
is no
Get
box.
out the box and be in the infinity of the universe. You know, it's one of the things that I truly believe that has made me a good teacher is I believe that my job is not pushing all this information into you. I truly believe that it's pulling it out and helping you see that it's already there. That's why when we talk about education externally, I mean, it has value, but all by itself, it's robotic. You know, you're regurgitating what somebody else thinks. You're regurgitating what someone else believes. And you don't get in touch with what you believe. I've been teaching a class this semester, and it's happened to be four, but I guess I was more aware that after every class, my class sounds like singing. And it sounds like this. Thank you, professor. Thank you, professor. Thank you, professor. Thank you. And I think, does this happen in all the classes? You know, your students thanking you. And then students have come up to me and said things like, this class is changing my life, or I have grown so much in this class. And there's a book I use, and I don't think I have it down here with me. I don't, but it's called I Am My Own Self Validation. And they do a journal throughout the semester with this book. And every day they have to open it, and whatever comes up, they have to write about it. And stuff comes up like, you are the gift. And then they'll just kind of like, you know, what? Who tells you that every human being, every child born into the world is a gift to the world? Who tells us that? You see, but you can tell yourself that. Or you can open it and it'll say, give yourself credit. You're amazing. How many of us don't give ourselves credit? You know, my children said to me yesterday, they said, we don't know anybody who is as thoughtful and kind and loving as you. And I was like, and then they said, how did you get that way? And I saw my mother's face. That's my mom back there.
Mm.
I thought, that's who I saw. I said, my mother. My mother taught me to care, to be kind, not nice, but kind, and to give. My mother was a giver, you know, giving 101. All that you give comes back to you. So why are we holding on to stuff, you know? Loving. She was just accepting of everybody. She was very critical. My mother was very critical.
Mm.
Her favorite word was should, you know? And I had to learn to let that word go in my own, because I was taught with a lot of shoulds. But I had this friend who says, and this is how we all learn from each other. She goes, should is SHIT. And then she says, I don't know why people like to always should on themselves, not, you know, should on themselves. And I laughed, but it made sense to me because we do it to ourselves. And that's how we start to demean our mistakes and not learn our lessons from them, because we want to hide from them now. I don't want people to know messed up here. I don't want people to know I messed up there. One of the things that happens in my classes is students start sharing their mistakes, which helps students who aren't sharing it learn from it anyway.
Mhm.
You see, in other words, everybody doesn't have to self-reveal. Everybody's not comfortable on that level. But when somebody else does, and that's your story, then you're still able to learn from someone else's experiences.
Starla, what do you think of justice in the world, especially with your wonderful background,
Hmm.
lots of years of teaching, and seeing the United States evolve from decades of hatred to betterment, and we still have room for growth. What is your thoughts on justice in the world?
Well, first of all, I believe in justice, but I don't believe that everything's going to be fair. And with fair, people are looking for equity. And fair means sometimes that somebody's got to give up something so that someone else can have something. We're living in a world where, unless we can, a nation of homeless people, and we're telling them move off the sidewalk, but we don't tell them where to go. Move to where, you see. And so fairness means that we will at some point, if we're going to address it, take our resources and say, okay, if I can pay these billions of dollars for Twitter, I could feed some people and house some people. You see what I'm saying? So it's not like we don't have the resources. We don't share the resources. And people, it's like the little house movement. Well, many people are living in big empty spaces. I always think of young African Americans who come from low income backgrounds, and then they become multimillionaires because of their athletic abilities, and they buy these beautiful mansions, and then they stuff them with their friends. Why? Because they'd be scared living up in that big empty house all by themselves. Nobody thinks about that. Why do they have a posse? Because they come from a posse. They come from big families. They come from people being around, and they don't particularly want to just now, I have my mansion, I want to live in here all by myself. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we have opulence in ways that we don't even want it. It's a status symbol. It's like driving a BMW or a Tesla or whatever. Okay, you can pay that big monthly payment. You can pay that high insurance rate, and you can do all that stuff. And it's okay if you have it and you want it. But if you don't know that you're enough, it doesn't matter how many of them you have. You won't know you're enough. It's that kind of thing. And then, what else do I want to say about it? What else do you want to know about it?
I know that you delve into justice in some of your classes in ways of teaching them that they are the answers.
This is the thing. You can't talk about justice without talking about the inequities that exist. We want to talk about justice, but we don't want to talk about sexism. We want to talk about justice, but we don't want to talk about ageism. We want to talk about justice, but we don't want to talk about racism. How you going to talk about it? We have to talk about the isms in order to get to justice. I believe that all that we put out comes back on us. So if you don't want to suffer, then don't be creating those situations of suffering. I don't think I'm a nice person because I'm a nice person. I think I truly understand reciprocity. When I'm good to you, I'm being good for myself, And a woman tried to give me $500 one time, and I really, really, really needed it, but I didn't think she had that kind of money. So I said, I can't take this. And she looked at me and she said, why are you trying to block my blessings? And I heard her. And so I accepted it. And she got blessed and I got blessed. Are you following me? So that's part of it. Justice. Justice isn't something that a law can create for you. Justice is something that you have to internalize in your own humanity. We had a civil rights movement. Dr. Martin Luther King gave his life along with many other people who gave their lives. And yet we don't have justice. You see what? Because we changed the law, we didn't change the heart. We changed the law, but we didn't change the head. The head and the heart have to be connected for us to get to justice. And we're disconnected, we talk about what we want for America, but we don't talk about what we want for the world. There is no peace until we have internal peace, self-peace. Are we peaceful? And so that becomes part of getting to justice. I believe that when people love themselves and can see themselves in other people, that will be where we get to justice. Because we will not do to others what we don't want done to ourselves. But we're not there yet. And when it comes to our education, what is kind of scary is that they're trying to change the narrative so we don't speak truth. The truth is we are on somebody else's land. That's true. Simple truth. It's not questionable. And that we don't give honor, first of all, to the people whose land we're on. We don't give apology to the people whose land we're on. And we don't give the rights to the people whose land we're on. And we don't give some of the land back. We don't share the land. You got to share space, for there to be justice in that space. Same thing in terms of we don't call things what they are. We talk about police brutality, and that's ugly. But we also have to talk about police murders and that they don't go to jail for that and they don't do time for that unless it's public enough for everybody to see it, as in George Floyd. But none of us thought we were going to actually watch a real murder happening on television. None of us thought that. And that's why the protests were so great, because we're human beings, and it did something to our senses. It's like, but the beauty in it, the gift in it, is that we had to acknowledge something that people have been saying for hundreds of years. A Black man was lynched in the United States of America every 2.5 days for 51 years. And yet it wasn't even in the history books. And now we're trying to take slavery out of the history books and call it involuntary, involuntary transport or something. You know what I mean? And as women, there's so many things happening. I was saying to my students the other day, the number one form of slavery in our lifetime is the sex trafficking of women and children. We don't talk about it, and we don't teach it in school. How am I going to protect myself from someone trying to lure me away if I don't know people are luring people away? So truth and justice are like this. Truth and justice are like this. And so for me, let's teach the truth. One of the things I loved so much about Aunt Kate was she taught truth. She didn't sugarcoat everything. She didn't make you believe things were better than they were, but she also let you know if they can be, and that you can be a part of making that happen. I'm amazed at what our students, our brilliant university students, do not know, have no clue of what's happening in their world, and don't really know how to get past the pleasant narrative. It's like, well, that would be horrendous if that were true. Well, let it be true and horrendous, and let's fix it.
I think it's beautiful what you're saying, and what you said at the beginning, to be curious, to actually research and really learn about things till we get to the point that we're teaching both truth and justice at the same time.
And I'm always learning. I'm always learning. One of the reasons I love to teach is because my students teach me so much. I was doing a diversity training, and in the diversity training, one of the people who was there, not as part of the training, but as part of the staff, said to me that her father was from, I can't remember, it was one of the countries that we call Middle East of something. I don't know what Middle East means, but anyway, it was a country on the Asian continent. And he was saying that America is a nation of strangers.
Mm.
And I looked and I thought, for 50 years, I've been teaching in school. And in school, we're not learning about each other, which keeps us in that stranger mode as opposed to a nation of Americans, you know? I mean, I thought that was brilliant. And then she said, his favorite song comes from Sam Cooke, who was an African American singer from the 60s. And it's called A Change Is Gonna Come, and it's like we share music, we share food. Well, let's share some information about ourselves and each other. I believe in something called content and context. I believe we're all the same people, but we act out our sameness different. Our dances are different, our foods are different, our style is different, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you for sharing all of this. There's so much depth in that I hope the listeners really delve into it within themselves, to all those meanings, and how we can really make an impact going forward with who we are, how we love ourselves, and how we treat each other. What would you let them know about your 70th birthday?
Oh, my 70th birthday party.
Yes.
Hey, I'm still high. It was 3 years ago.
So,
But my daughter and my grandchildren got together and they said, we're going to give you a party, and we're only going to invite the people that we know absolutely love you. And so I walked into my birthday party, and there were 195 people that actually showed up. And literally, one of my friends looked around and she said, who else could have a room this diverse? They were all ages, they were all ethnicities, they were all walks of life. I had everything from government officials to uh, ex-cons in my room. And I was just so humbled, and I was so thrilled. I had students from the 70s, students that had flown out from New York and all these places. And that once again lets me know that they're learning,
mhm.
because you don't do that unless you're learning, and that learning is somehow meaningful to you. And then I even had a roommate. Well, I had two roommates that I hadn't seen, one in 20 years and one in 40 years. And one of them came holding a picture. And in that picture was a picture of my firstborn child wearing a gown, a baby gown that she had made her. And it was an African print. And this friend of mine was European American from Palo Alto. Her experience as our roommate was that uh, these are the first Black people that she's ever had close relationships with. And we've stayed in touch all these years. So I know that when people are their authentic selves, that's when you build authentic friendships, you know. And then I had friends who spoke about our friendships and told stories, and my kids were like cracking up. And then I had students who spoke and talked about their experiences in the class and how life-changing it was. And one of the stories that I'd never heard that touched me very much was I had this young woman in my class who actually became one of my student workers. And she told this story about how she would walk into class, into the office or into class, and I would say, "Give me a hug," and she said she would stand there and I would hug her. And then she said one day I said to her, "Let me show you how to hug." And she took my arm and put it around her. She took my other arm and put it around her, and she said, "And I've been hugging ever since." She said, "But I had not been hugged as a child,
Mm.
and I didn't know what to do with that." We can teach through experience. We can teach through stories. We can teach through field trips. My students have met all kind of amazing human beings, because I don't believe that learning only takes place in the classroom. So they've met politicians. They've met uh, amazing researchers and holistic doctors, as well as MDs. They've they see that they have a world of choice and a world of opportunity. And that's how they grow, and that's how we grow, you know?
Starla, honestly, I think you are one of the wealthiest human beings on this planet, and you keep spreading that wealth across to your students, to everyone that you touch. What is the best way for our audience to get a hold of you?
Love Starla Lewis at gmail.com.
Thank you. And is there anything that you'd like to share that I may not have even thought to ask you right now?
Well, my daughter, my granddaughter, and I do women's workshops, and they're called Woman's Worth. And the purpose of these workshops are for women to become self-defined. I think everyone has to be self-defined, but I think as women collectively, men have told us who we're supposed to be in the world. And culture after culture after culture, women adhere to what men have told us we're supposed to be. And from that, I think women suffer from a lot of depression and a lot of grief because we're not being who we are, you know, and we're not having discussions with each other about who you be, who are you, you know, and going beyond the stereotypes of women. And so we do these multi-generational women empowerment workshops. And the ages range from as young as the parents feel comfortable bringing them to as long as they've been on the planet. So literally we've had children there as 5, 6, 7 years old, and we've had grandmas there at 90 and plus. And so they come and they start to share. And what happens is there's not a real tight agenda. There's mostly we stimulate the conversation and then we open it. And women start to get free from the shoulds, you know, and women start getting comfortable with naming their body parts and being comfortable talking about them. And women get comfortable asking questions that their mother never told them about, gave them no answers for. It's a beautiful, beautiful experience. And we've had a room with as many as 500 women having personal, up close chit chats. We always leave it open to men who might want to come because men don't know women. And we feel like if those who want to know should have the opportunity to hear it from us, as opposed to going to a friend, you know, some guy friend saying, tell me about, you know, how to deal with women. And then they get some crazy story, you know, passed on generation after generation. So that's one of the things that we do. So the I Am book came out of Woman's Worth because they asked, we want something that we can continue to do to reinforce us doing that. But it isn't just for women, and it's not just for adults. Children love it. Older people love it. And the reason they love it is self-validation. And Aunt Kate taught me, child, you got to be your own self-validation. Why? Because that's the antidote to all those negative things society's saying to us, all those negative things parents might have said, those negative things the brothers and sisters, etc. It's a thought eraser. And you can replace it with truth. You are brilliant. You are powerful. You are limitless. You are love and more, much, much more.
Thank you. And to every listener that's out there, I hope you join one of these workshops, send your kids to them, because we really are looking to impact the world in a way that it hasn't happened yet. We're moving towards it, but we're not there yet. So your work is tremendous in helping with that. So please do join her. Starla, thank you so much. I really appreciate you. And remember, to all our listeners, our viewers, our attitude always determines our altitude in life. And the only way for us to move forward is to begin connecting and seeing each other as who we are and as who we are going towards. Thank you for being here and watch us on the next video. Starla, thank you.
Thank you.
And I
Attitude is
love you.
everything.
And I love you. Thank you.
I love you too.